So Stan Lee, the co-creator of so many iconic Marvel superheroes from the 1960s, has passed away at the age of 95. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about one of the most influential creators and entertainers of pop culture today. Because he had such a huge impact on my life. I would not be the person that I am today without Stan Lee, I guarantee it. And it's crazy to think how in the 1960s, when he created the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, X-Men, Spider-Man, that creating these 20-page comics would eventually become such a big powerhouse in pop culture today. They eventually spawned TV shows like the 1967 Spider-Man TV show, eventually leading to the 90s, where it really boomed with the X-Men, Spider-Man, and on the DC side, Batman and Robin adventures. It was crazy how this was just starting to show up everywhere. We eventually got video games that started popping up, which eventually finally led to some amazing movies that turned into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, starting with Iron Man 1 back in 2008. Eventually with Avengers Infinity War, and if you can't tell, I'm a huge fan of this. There's a poster. I have 2 shirts of Infinity War. I ended up going back. I've been in and out of comics since I was a kid, and comic books were what got me to read. Without comic books, I don't know if I'd be as much of a big reader as I am today, because my dad would every few weeks buy me a new comic book, and I don't have any of my old comic books. I just have some stuff that I got in the last few years. All my older stuff are packed away at my mother's place. But my dad would buy me a few comic books every few weeks, and I would just look at them, and he would read me what was actually going on in the little bubbles. But you could kind of see what was going on by just looking at the pictures. And eventually, as I got older, I got tired of waiting for my dad to read them to me, so I knew a little bit of how to read from school, and I pushed myself to learn faster so that I could read my comic books. And eventually that transitioned on to actual small novels like Goosebumps and Animorphs. And then eventually I became a very avid reader, reading gigantically, over 1,000 pages worth of books. And that's because, and I'm in love with books and novels and stories, and being able to see them in so many different formats, like comic books, novels, video games, movies, TV shows. Like, I will read up any version of a story because I loved the stories of superheroes when I was a kid. And so I started reading comics when I was younger, and I probably read them until I was maybe about 14 years old. So I probably around, I don't know, 6 or 8. I know that my first comic book was a Spider-Man comic book, and I would have been about 6 to 8 years old when I got that. And then eventually around 14 is when I kind of stopped reading comics. Started again when I was in college, so in my early 20s, late like 18, 19. I read a few more back then. Stopped for a while. 2012, I really got into it, and that's when I ended up getting quite a few number 1 issues, because they were kind of restarting a lot of series. So I ended up getting introduced to a lot of new storylines that were kind of going on. This Avengers Assemble was based off of the team from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because that was becoming so popular. And then I ended up going from single issues to getting the trade paperbacks. I love the art for so many of these characters. Obviously, this isn't exactly what Stan Lee has done, although he did still contribute every once in a while to stories that were going on. I really wish that I had my issue 700 with me. It's at my mother's place, but I have issue 700, which eventually led into Superior Spider-Man afterwards. So yeah, I really got into comic books at that point. Slowed down after a few years in 2012. I probably stopped in 2014. But I still kept watching the movies and stuff. And then just recently, with the release of Avengers Infinity War, got right back into everything. Like, I went just earlier in the year, I ended up picking up some more trade paperbacks because I wanted to know more about what was going on with Infinity War. So I ended up getting all of these relatively thick paperbacks here. And just as of, I think, last week, I ended up getting my first ever omnibus for the Fantastic Four. The first, basically the reason why Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were able to have this gigantic boom with Marvel and creating all their such iconic characters. And they're so influential today because they ended up with X-Men and Spider-Man. Because of the technology, they were able to make it seem much more realistic, that you could watch Spider-Man web slinging and it looked okay at the time. X-Men looked great for the time. And then with the Marvel Cinematic Universe just completely dominating the box office. So many more people now know about who the Avengers are, about who Spider-Man is, X-Men, everything like that. It's there's hardly anything that can make as much money as an Avengers movie now. Star Wars is one of the few ones that can do it, and it's like James Cameron, Titanic, and Avatar are the only other two that are close to being able to compete with them. It's insane how influential and such a positive force that Stan Lee was. Because if you ever watch any of his interviews, he's like the nicest person. And you hear about these stories. My Facebook was flooded from people that I'm friends with that ended up writing like a comic book or something, sent it into Marvel, and ended up getting a letter back from Stan Lee saying they appreciated the work, they couldn't use it unfortunately, but to keep going, to keep pushing forward. And imagine getting a letter like that from Stan Lee, and how that would have changed their lives, how much that would have made their day at that time. It's weird because Stan Lee was 95 years old, and I was talking to a coworker of mine when we heard the news, and we said it was crazy that he was 95, but we still felt like we had another few good years with him, you know? He was 95 years old. We can't complain too much. I know that there's been times where I've read that like he kind of did get screwed over by the industry and things like that, but I still do think that his positive persona was what allowed him to make it to 95 and to live the life that he did with the amount of fans that absolutely adored him. And he was still going to events until the end, much less frequently than he was because he was getting older. But to still live a life like that, I can't ask for a better ending to, like, Stan Lee with his superheroes ended up being my moral guide, my moral compass for when I was younger, as much as my parents were. So to me, Stan Lee was almost like this person that I wanted to live up to, without really realizing it because of how much he influenced my life. And I'm going to watch Avengers Infinity War because I haven't watched it since I picked it up, so I've only seen it the 2 times in theaters. I'm going to watch that with my girlfriend tonight. And it's too bad that we've lost Stan Lee. I really feel that there's like a hole inside of me. And it's weird because I never met the man. I would have loved to. And as I was getting the omnibus and getting back into all the trade paperbacks, I was really wanting to get back into comics like hardcore. And I'm pretty sure that at this point, not because of the passing of Stan Lee, but because I picked up my first omnibus, that I was going to... I think that I'm going to get into it and continue reading until the rest of my life. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if I could meet Stan Lee and get his autograph? I didn't think that was going to be possible because I knew that he was 95 and the chances of him doing another signing around my area or close enough for me to attend, and you know he can only do a certain amount of signings, it would have been insane. It was incredibly expensive too, but in the back of my mind I was just like, oh, that would just be so amazing. But I've never met the man, and he still has had a huge impact on me. So I hope, rest in peace, Stan Lee. We lost one of the great ones, but your work will continue on, will live on through all the different superheroes and characters that you've created. And I believe that we will never be without superheroes as long as the human race is alive. Excelsior, good sir.